All right. So, for those that are in worship here, make sure if you need water, because it will get probably warmer as we move on. If you need water, it's back in the cooler. Feel free, you can jump up if you need to make sure you're staying hydrated. It's important to stay hydrated. All right. So, we are going to continue in this series called Things Jesus Never Said. And why is it that we're looking at things that Jesus never said? Because when we see the things that Jesus never said, it gives a highlight to the things that Jesus actually said. So here's some things that Jesus never said. Go into all the world and preach whatever makes people happy. Jesus never said that. Whoever wants to be my disciple must affirm themselves, avoid the cross, and follow your heart. You see, it sounds like a pithy saying, doesn't it? Like you're like, oh, like that. Like I want to be Jesus' disciple and affirm whatever it is in me and avoid, going to sacrifice myself and, just follow my heart. That's like the statement of our day, follow your heart. The problem is, right, our heart is an idol factory. Our heart can be deceived. And so if we're following our heart, sometimes it's not a good thing. And because we're talking about happiness today, I just want you to be happy. Jesus never said it. Because when we understand the things that Jesus did say, and this is important for us to understand this, that when we hear the words of Jesus, when we follow in the words of Jesus, this has a power to transform, change us, enlighten us, evolve us. All of these words they can use mixed, they're all interchangeable. And when we hear the words of Jesus and we say, Jesus, help me to hear it, to take it to heart, and then to live it out. You see, those steps are necessary. Why? Because if we just hear it, and then we don't do anything with it, it's kind of like it goes in one ear and out the other, and we're just like, oh, cool. Like, I know some words of Jesus. Yeah, though those things are pretty cool. That's it. But when we hear it, and then we absorb it, we take it into our lives, into ourselves, and then we're saying, Jesus, teach me to figure out what this means so that I can live it. And that's where transformation is possible. So we're going to go to our passage here this morning. You heard Heather read it just a moment ago, but we're going to be in John chapter 8. If you got your phones, you can pull it up there. If you want a paper Bible, there's some that are also, if not in your pews, there are also some in the back, if you like the paper Bible as well, so that you can either read along or you can just listen to me read it. So John chapter 8, starting with verse 2. But early the next morning, he was back again in the temple. A crowd soon gathered, and he sat down and taught them. As he was speaking, the teachers of religious law and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in the act of adultery. They put her in front of the crowd. Teacher, they said to Jesus, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. The law of Moses says to stone her. What do you say? Now we're going to stop there for a moment because here is a couple of things that are happening in this passage, right? First thing that you may not see, or maybe you do see, is that usually in an act of adultery, there are two people, right? So what's missing in this equation? The dude. Like you're telling me that these Pharisees were going around and peeking in people's windows and we're like, oh, that one, this one's not together with that one. Let's take the woman and bring her to be stoned. And this is not in the marijuana sense. This is in the giant boulders of all sorts thrown at people until they die sense. They were bringing this woman missing, absent, the guy who she was also caught in adultery with. And they were bringing them to Jesus, or her to Jesus. So you find this whole thing, you're like, well, so the guy's missing. And they're here because now they put this woman in front of Jesus, and they're like, so what do you say? Right? This is where the Pharisees, teachers of the law, are always trying to trap Jesus. Because when you look at it, it's a no-win situation. Jesus says, yes, she needs to be stoned and put to death. He loses his reputation of being full of grace, full of forgiveness, full of love. Right? Jesus is going to be absent of that if he's saying, yep, I agree with you, let's put her to death. But if he says no, then he's condoning the sin of adultery. And if he's like, no, don't put her to death, then he's going to be like, oh, and the Pharisees are like, yes, now we have him. Now he finally is going against the law of Moses, and we have him in a place where he's actually going against us, not just in this big sense, right, but actually going against God. So what's he going to do? How's he going to handle a no-win situation? Just like Jesus always does. He always has a better way. Jesus, what does he do? It says in the text. We'll go back to it real quick. So they were trying to trap him in verse 6 and say something that they could use against him. But Jesus stooped down and wrote in the dust with his finger. You're like, wait a sec, Jesus, this isn't an answer. What are you doing? So he gets down and he just starts scribbling in the sand. And the question that's always asked in this, the question that's been asked for generations and generations and generations is, what did Jesus write? It's a good question, right? Everything else that I'm going to say after this is all conjecture, because I don't know what Jesus wrote. But what I do say is, perhaps this is what Jesus did. Is that he started writing down as he saw a Pharisee. We're going to call this Pharisee Joe, because that's a pretty neutral name. We're going to call him Joe Pharisee. And so what did Jesus do? He bent down and he wrote the name Joe in the sand. And he wrote Joe. And then he started saying, Joe, I remember when you went to the Sabbath and you weren't thinking about God and keeping the Sabbath day holy, but just in outside projection. You were only concerned about what people saw. You weren't concerned what was in your heart. And Jesus is writing down the sin. Jesus is writing down every sin that Joe has. So Joe, he's looking at the sand. He's like, whoa. Okay, what is this going to prove, Jesus? But then he moves on to the next Pharisee, the next teacher of the law. Maybe he writes their name down. And maybe he starts going through the long list of things that are on their sin list. See, these are the problems that we get involved in. This is where Jesus is working wonders as a teacher. He is sitting here, he's like, all right, so if I'm caught, right, they're trying to be able to put me in a situation where I'm never going to answer them in the right way. So this is what's going to happen. I'm just going to start writing things down in the sand. And these teachers don't know what to do with it. So Jesus, in 8 verse 7, right? They kept demanding an answer. So he stood up again and said, "All right, but let the one who has never sinned throw the first stone." And then he stooped down again and continued writing in the sand. You see, here's the part. That Jesus does give an answer. He says, "All right, Pharisees, teachers of the law, you saw what I wrote in the sand." But they kept pushing. And he said, "Whoever it is that was without sin, whoever it is," and this is where we try to discern in the text, because the text doesn't just say without sin in this moment. Like if you haven't committed adultery, then you're free to be able to throw a rock or a stone. But this, in its context, in its understanding, and its meaning, says it's even those who are without ever wanting to sin. How do we distinguish this? This is like saying, you know what, like there's somebody who comes up to me and maybe they're hostile. They're like trying to attack me. They're trying to be able to throw all kinds of lies at me, deceive me, trying to be able to put... Now, in my heart, what I'm doing is saying I'm cursing them. In my head, I'm going through this whole conversation about how bad these people are and what I actually want to scream at them and yell at them. And you say, but God saved me because I never uttered those words. You see, there was always a sin intention. I wanted to yell at them. I wanted to scream at them. I wanted to hurt them, just like they were hurting me. You see, Jesus says those who are without sin, this is even without even the intention of wanting to sin. Jesus saying, if you ever even had the intention of wanting to hurt this woman or hurt anyone else, like you're already disqualified from throwing a stone. And this is where it gets really easy for us as people to point fingers. Because when we look at ourselves, we often find all of our deficiencies. We know them all, pretty much. We know all of our failures. We know the places where we should have acted and didn't act. We know the places that we shouldn't have done what we did, or we shouldn't have said what we said. It's really easy for us, though, not to be able to point all of our stuff out for other people, but it's easy then for us to see it in other people. Oh, look at you. Look how bad you are. Look how easy it is for us to be able to point our fingers at everyone else except ourselves. But we always look at, this is always the thing when we talk about pointing fingers, is that when we point this finger, there's always three that are pointing back at us. In our nature, this is part of who we are. It's easy to blame. It's easy to point fingers. It's easy to throw and lob all kinds of accusations at other people without trying to see it in ourselves. So we continue with the text. John 8, verse 9. When the accusers heard this, they slipped away one by one, beginning with the oldest, until only Jesus was left in the middle of the crowd with the woman. You see, every single one of them said, whatever it was that Jesus wrote in the sand, whatever it was that Jesus then said, whoever it is without sin can throw the first stone. they started to leave, eldest first. They knew that Jesus knew them. They maybe couldn't explain it because they still were trying to discount Jesus. They were trying to be able to say Jesus is claiming to be something he's not, and Jesus actually was the Messiah. Jesus was the Savior. And yet something what Jesus did, what Jesus said, they started to go away. Every single one of them left without throwing a stone. So Jesus is sitting with this woman. Now they're alone. No one else is around them. And Jesus never says, right? Jesus never says to this woman, you see, there's no one left to accuse you. Now go and do what makes you happy. You want to do adultery stuff? Cool, man. You're right on. I affirm you. You're good. You want to go and live your life of sin? Sure, sin's good. It makes us happy. Jesus does not tell her that, right? Jesus is not trying to affirm her sin. Jesus is not trying to be able to tell her to continue sinning. So what does Jesus say? Go and sin no more. Right? This is like that same when we look at the Great Commission when Jesus says go, right? When you're going, go. Like this is something that has some immediacy behind it. This is like saying, Jesus is telling you, listen, I'm not trying to condemn you here. As he said to her, I'm not going to stand and condemn you right now, but this is what I want you to do. This is a moment that I'm declaring your freedom. Go, be free. So this reminds me of Paul. When Paul talks about freedom, and when he's like, hey, so should we go on sinning so that grace may abound? No. Should you, now that you are set free, continue back to your life of slavery to sin? No. But why? Why do we always return to it? Even though we hear the words of Jesus, I mean, in every single week, what we do is go through times of confession where we spend time with God saying, God, I know you know what I've done. You know what I didn't do. I lay it all down before you. Every single week, what we declare is the freedom that what Jesus has done, that he lived, that he died, that he rose again for you. This is the freedom that you have. And then this is what we do. We say, oh, well, Jesus is going to forgive me anyways. I'll just return to my life of sin. I'll return back to slavery. I'll return back to the old ways. But what does that do? If all of a sudden you've been released from prison, do we say, oh, you know what? I kind of liked having 3 squares a day. Can I just go back? I mean, some of the greatest stories are the people who were convicted, who spent like 30 years in prison just to find out that they were innocent the whole time. These people aren't saying, hey, can you just keep me for a little while longer? No. They're like, I'm innocent and now I'm set free. I'm not returning back to this place. But do you know what happens? In our system, in the criminal justice system, people get institutionalized. Meaning what? Like all they know is prison. All they know is jail. And so what happens? They're like, oh, well, I'm out and I'm set free, but this is the only life that I know. And so I'm going to go on continuing to commit crime so that I can end up back in the place where I was comfortable. This is exactly what happens to us. We should be the people that are like, we've been declared free. We are been set free. The prison door is open. We should be celebrating every single day of our life. But some reason we become institutionalized to sin. And we keep going back to it. Why? Because sin can be fun, right? This is the truth right here. Sin can be fun. Sin offers us all kinds of satisfaction. It offers us freedom. It offers us pleasure. And this is the reason why sin becomes an institutionalized part of our life, is because we're saying, oh, but I always love this sin because it brings me joy, it brings me happiness, it brings me pleasure. But you see what happens with sin, is this the promise? Sin's like, hey, let me just tell you, it's really good when you're just seeking your own happiness. It's really good when all you're trying to do is bring yourself pleasure. Sin whispers in our ear. Sin says, I'm going to take care of you when everything is going bad. Sin is whispering to us and saying, no, I really want to be here for you. I want to be your support system. I want to embrace you. And we're like, oh, look at this sin. It's so nice. It's comfortable. It's so cute. Then what happens? Sin turns. Sin says, now I have you trapped. Sin says, now I have exactly where I want you. And guess what? That's messed up. Because sin likes to keep you down. Sin likes to be able to put you in a place that has you doubt everything. So when we are considering this whole thing, when we're talking about happiness, sin wants to promise us happiness, but here's what happens. Sin promises satisfaction, but it's at the cost of disobedience to God. This is the reason why Paul always then talks about this struggle, right? The good that I would do, the good that I want to do, the good that I know that I should be doing, I just don't do it. Thanks be to God that we're not trapped in that. Amen. Because if we were trapped in it, then it's just going to send us spiraling further down. It's going to send us into a further pit of depression, of anxiety, of worries. Why? Because everything is doubted then. Sin says there is going to be the place that I'm going to put you in the pit and I'm going to keep you in prison. It's not where we want to be. It's not where we should be. But here's the part. If something goes against my happiness, then all we have to claim is it's not my truth. Oh man, so many ways in which can happen in this statement alone. Because here, if you thought it was a coincidence that we were going to talk about happiness on 4th of July, it is not. Our nation says we all should pursue happiness. All right, so if we're pursuing happiness and somebody is getting in the way of my happiness, what happens to them? I am going to remove them. I'm going to not listen to them. I'm not going to hear them. And so what happens? In every way, shape, or form, we need to pursue happiness. Masks don't make me happy. I'm going to figure out every possible way of not wearing a mask because it makes me happy not to wear one. You know what makes me happy? Having my political party in power in this nation. It makes me happy because all kinds of stuff can happen. We get the right supreme justices in place that all of our laws will then go our way so that we can be happy. You know what makes me happy? Having a whole bunch of guns in my house. Why? Because I feel safe then. And safety makes me happy. Don't take away my guns. Don't take away my rights. Because when you take those away, it doesn't make me happy. And I need to pursue happiness. You see, there's like a million different ways when we are looking at a nation, and I'm not trying to be able to say I'm anti-American. But when we are trying to be able to more and more over the last, probably 50 years, 100 years maybe, that we've been taking Christianity and we've been taking our nation and our nationalism and we've tried to then blend the two. And you see what happens when you blend Christianity with our nation, and then you're like, but wait a second, the two don't really jive, right? As we can see, pursue happiness, Jesus never says it. So what we try to do then is if we're trying to pursue happiness and also blending Christianity into it, we're saying, Jesus, I need you to say that we need to pursue happiness. And so we make Jesus say things that Jesus never said. We can be grateful to be in a nation that allows us to worship freely. We can be grateful and be, happy, right? Citizens of the nation. But when we try to be able to take a look and try to blend them in, which leads us to then having a whole bunch of people, I bet you if you go out there to church services across the nation today, because it's 4th of July, there's going to be all kinds of, God bless America's being sung, all kinds of things that we're going to see, that all of a sudden we're going to elevate our nation to a place that it never should be. We can love our nation. We can love being citizens of the United States and also see that there are things that have happened that are not good. This doesn't make us anti-American. What it does is makes us followers of Jesus, saying we're pursuing the words of Christ. We're pursuing the things that Jesus told us so that we can live. All right. I'm getting warm. So, if it makes me happy, it must be true. It's not a good statement. But here's the other part of it. But if I follow Jesus, that means all of the fun's going to be sucked out of life. This is a common misconception of Christianity. This is something that I also believe that Tabor tries to actively work against. We love to have fun. Do we not? We love to have fun. We're fun. So This doesn't mean that we're trying to be able to pursue just the things because we love fun. We're saying it actually is fun to follow Jesus. It's fun to be involved in each other's lives. It's fun to be saying, you know what, we are going to celebrate and praise together. We want to do this. But I have this illustration. Would a fish be happy on the beach? That's a question for you. No? Would we all say, no, the fish wouldn't? Why would we say that? Right. So here's the thing. So if we put the fish on the beach and then we invited a whole bunch of his fish friends over to have a party together, would he then enjoy the beach? Okay, all right. What about this? What about if we built on the sand, on the beach, this beautiful house for the fish to live in? Would the fish then be happy living on the beach? Do you see where I'm going with this? Do you see where this illustration's taking us? It's not where a fish belongs. It's not where the fish was created for. The beach was never meant to have a fish just being there and expecting the fish to survive. The fish would be flopping and trying to gain air. But you see what happens, the sin is going to then promise this fish, hey, I'm going to invite you up on the beach, and we're going to have a good time. We're going to do whatever it is that makes us happy, and I tell you that I'm going to bring all of this to you, fish. And the fish is like, I can't breathe. Sin's going to do the same thing to you. It's going to promise, but it's never going to deliver. Might bring us happiness for a moment, but actually bring us further into despair. Holiness. This is what Jesus calls us to. Jesus says, be holy as I am holy. Holiness isn't mutually exclusive of happiness. Holiness actually is the pathway to true happiness and joy. And the reason why I say and is because happiness and joy are not the same thing. We've equated the two for quite some time. We talk about, hey, I'm feeling joyful today, and so some people are thinking, oh, you're happy today. No, joy is something, as we know from the scriptures, that it says, even while you're suffering, be joyful. So you're like, wait a second, I can't be happy while I'm suffering. No, God doesn't expect you to be happy while you're suffering. But what God does expect is that you're going to have joy. Why? Because this will not last. This suffering that you're going through is not going to overtake you. This is a promise from God to you. This is something that we cannot get caught up in, because when we're saying actually pursuing holiness or pursuing the things of God are actually a pathway that we can experience both happiness and joy. I'll give you some proof text for it. A proof text is when I say take a single verse and give you proof of what I just said. Right? That's what it is. Proof text. Psalm 16, verse 11. You will show me the way of life, granting me the joy of your presence and the pleasures of living with you forever. This is where we find happiness and joy. When we say, you know what? Nothing here can defeat me. Death's never going to win. I'm always going to have the promise that God is going to be with me through every single thing that happens. Paul, 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13. Paul writes, the temptations in your life are no different from what others experience, and God is faithful. He will not allow the temptation to be more than you can stand. When you are tempted, He will show you a way out so that you can endure. So when we are thinking about and going through those moments of temptation, when sin is kind of dangling the carrot in front of us, if you like carrots, it's going to dangle it in front of us, and you're like, oh, I should pursue that, I should pursue that. And yet here's the thing, even in those when those temptations come, God's saying, I'm going to give you a way out. Are you looking for the way out, or are you looking for the thing that's going to give you that moment of pleasure instead of a lifetime of joy and happiness? Paul's saying, when you go through those times, when you're like, I'm being tempted, what are you going to do? Ask God. God, I'd like a way out. And even when you're talking to God about it, God's already making a way for you to find a way out of this temptation, to find a way out that the sin will not grab a hold of you, hold on to you, and imprison you. Every temptation is an invitation to depend on Christ. Even while we celebrate our independence, our freedom in this nation. But we declare here, as followers of Jesus, that we're not just free to go about and do whatever it is we want to do that makes us happy. But instead we say, where can I depend on Christ in every moment? Jesus never said, do whatever makes you happy. He said, go and leave your life of sin. In Jesus' name, amen.